Today is Tuesday, November 23rd, and this is William Michael of the Classical Liberal Arts Academy. In 2 days, we'll be celebrating Thanksgiving, and holiday celebrations for many families are times of great joy and festivity where they get together with like-minded relatives and enjoy the holidays. They share in a like-mindedness. They share in a common family religion, common family culture, common family traditions, and so on. But for many, the holidays are times of stress and confusion because we find sort of division in our hearts. This is especially true of converts. And in this talk, I'll be assuming we're talking about converts to Catholicism. Holiday times can be difficult because we feel a social pressure and obligation to celebrate the holidays with family members, and yet we find that at this point in our lives, we don't see eye to eye on many issues, whether they be theological issues or practical issues, maybe even issues related to the celebration of the holidays themselves. And these can lead to some uncomfortable family gatherings and some regrettable decisions. These can lead to broken relationships and all kinds of practical problems. And I've been asked a number of times over the years to talk about dealing with this difficulty of family relations, particularly as it pertains to holiday celebrations. And I'd like to spend some time today thinking about that, talking about that, especially as we prepare for the celebration of Thanksgiving here in the United States and enter into Advent season and all of the Christmas festivities that will be coming over the next month. Now, I'm one of these adult converts, so I know personally how difficult these issues can be. My wife is also an adult convert, and so we've had to deal with this on a number of different fronts through the years. When you add to that we're parents and we have a certain responsibility for our children, what our children think and hear and see and experience, these situations can be very, very stressful and frustrating, and you almost get to the point where you wish the holidays would just go away. Ordinary time seems like the happy time of year, and then the holidays come, and you say, oh boy, what are we in for this year? But over the years, I think that we've wrestled with this together, my wife and I, and we've worked through a lot of the issues and tried to figure out what the real problems were and what the best solution to them might be. And I'd like to share some of those thoughts from our own experience, just to paint a little bit of a picture, to give you a bit of context here. I grew up in a non-Christian family, and yet I had a very weird childhood because I had a very close-knit, loving, strong family life. I loved my grandparents. I loved my uncles and aunts, my cousins. There were no divorces or any family ugliness around me when I was growing up. We had a very happy family life, celebrated all the holidays together, and yet we didn't go to church. All the holidays were simply secular celebrations where we got together, exchanged gifts, ate, drank, had fun, celebrated, watched movies, played games, and just enjoyed our time together. We were a happy, secular family. My house was the center of attention at Christmas time. My parents hosted a Christmas Eve party every year that was open to the whole neighborhood, and we had hundreds of people in and out of the house over the course of the evening every Christmas Eve, and we looked forward to it all year long. We had huge Christmas celebrations, tons of gifts. We had Christmas music playing for all of November, tons of food, Christmas cards hung all over the house, decorations. We were a family that loved celebrating Christmas. We also loved Thanksgiving. We had huge Thanksgiving dinners, went to the local high school football games. Easter time, same kind of thing, just all secular. We had Easter egg hunts and candy baskets and gifts and all kinds of secular celebrations for these traditionally Christian holidays. We had a very close-knit, happy family. And I grew up a lover of holiday celebrations. My wife had much of the same thing, except her family was a Christian family. Her family were evangelicals. And so they had their own ways of celebrating the holidays, but they were big holiday people too. Huge Christmas celebrations, and so on. And so when my wife and I married, we looked forward to holiday celebrations, but my wife and I had both been going through conversion experiences as adults, thinking seriously about life, thinking seriously about our responsibilities for our children, because while my life was full of fun and I have many very happy childhood memories, there was also a lot of evil in my life that I had to repent of and amend when I became an adult and, by the grace of God, came to faith. So I knew that raising my own children, I couldn't just shift back into my own family mode and do what my family did. There were serious issues that had to be addressed. And for the sake of my children, I believed in the fear of God. I had to raise them according to Christian teaching and sound Christian practice. And I had to figure out how to do that. And so my family was disappointed because all the things that we took for granted through the years, all of a sudden, I wasn't so eager to participate in. And I'll admit, from the family's perspective, I was a jerk in a lot of ways because at the time I had a vague sense that something was wrong here or something was wrong there. I couldn't articulate it very well. I was immature, was very individualistic, really didn't care what anyone thought, and I stepped on a lot of toes. And like I said, I was a jerk, and I know that. It was part of my growing up, part of my conversion. There's no easy way to do what I had to do. There's no right way because I had no one to help me. Grace was at work within me. And I wasn't surrounded by Christians. I had to act and make changes and improve my life and try as best I could to communicate that, but I often as I said, stepped on toes and just made people upset. Because like I said, those family traditions and those family celebrations were just taken for granted and really looked forward to by everyone. And so any questioning of them or disinterest in them was offensive. And I understand that. And the same thing for my wife. Her family had their own things to do, and as she and I established our own family life and felt convicted, as we say, about certain things and wanted to do things more perfectly, do things better. We wanted to glorify God in our family life. And we had to figure out how to do so. And as a young family, it was uncomfortable and awkward at times. And I think that's what many other couples feel as they get started with their Christian families. They know that there's things that need to change. Not necessarily evil things, things that simply aren't what they should be. They want to pursue a more perfect family culture, give their children something better than they had. And that makes people upset, makes parents upset, relatives upset, and it's difficult to deal with these times. And when we consider our children, many of us rightly are afraid. We're afraid of doing anything or introducing our children to anything that can cause them to stumble or become a distraction in their lives. And sometimes that concern for our children's sanctification and discipline and training requires us to take some extreme measure for the sake of safety, for erring on the side of caution. And those of you who share that sensitive conscience as parents understand what I'm talking about, and those of you who don't, I don't believe that it's possible for me to explain to you what that feeling consists of. Of course, there's a danger for scrupulosity, but as I discussed in a talk I made recently on scrupulosity, scrupulosity isn't intrinsically evil. Scrupulosity is an anxiety caused by doubt, where we're uncertain whether something is sinful or not. And we tend to err on the side of caution. And for some people, scrupulosity can become a real stumbling block, crippling and paralyzing obstacle in their lives. But for many, or I should say for most, scrupulosity is not a black or white issue. It's a question of degrees. Because we're often scrupulous in many different things. And a lot of times it's just because we don't have the answers yet. We don't have certainty. We have questions, we're uncomfortable, something's kind of vague. Our gut tells us that something's wrong, but we really don't know specifically what we should do. And in those situations, we're often accused of being scrupulous. And as I said, that's not necessarily a bad thing. Scrupulosity is simply a doubt concerning some moral issue, whether it's good or not. But these family issues are complex and difficult. They're especially complex because from the perspective of our relatives, their holiday celebrations are good. Compared to most of the things they do on a day-to-day basis, their holiday celebrations are the closest they come to religion, and they can't imagine anything being wrong with their Thanksgiving or their Christmas celebration or their Easter activities and so on. So to question the holiday celebration almost seems ridiculous. So it's easy to understand how these awkward situations develop. And over the years, I've wrestled with this because I love my family very much, and I do believe my family has good intentions and is trying to do good, and simply doesn't see some of the things that I see or think some of the things that I think. And I have to ask the question, is this really a black or white issue? Is this really an either or, an all or nothing dilemma? Or is there some other solution? And what happens here is often that the solution is a little complex, requires some extra effort, some sacrifice. And we have to examine ourselves to make sure that we're not just being lazy with these things, because we do have an obligation to our relatives. We do have an obligation to our parents and our siblings, our nephews and nieces. The golden rule requires that we do unto them as we would have them do unto us. And would we want them to just tell us to leave them alone on the holidays? Of course not. So the golden rule challenges us to love our neighbor. And the solution to these dilemmas I've found through the years is more complex, requires some dividing of issues, requires some extra sacrifices, extra effort, extra expenses, extra activities. But there are ways to enjoy these things and make the best of them, while both pursuing our own spiritual goals as these holiday celebrations arrive, especially since they're religious holidays. It's not like the desire to enjoy a religious holiday as a religious holiday is some kind of irrational desire. But at the same time, we have to acknowledge that there are established secular traditions and customs in our society, and we're not to just throw all of those away. Many of these things are good. So again, the ideal solution is to do both. Not to choose temporal family customs or religious celebrations, but to find solutions that allow us to both honor our natural relations and also pursue our own Christian ideals. That's why I say it takes a little extra thinking, a little extra planning, a little extra sacrifice, a little extra travel, a little extra expense, financially speaking. But we can do both without causing any avoidable and unnecessary offense to anyone. After all, the goal of the Christian life is always to draw others to Christ. And we never want to set ourselves up as an annoyance or give a bad example if we can avoid that. So we have to think also, what will tend most in the long run, in the big picture, to draw our relatives to the Catholic faith? Telling them to all leave us alone and go away? completely indulging in all of their secular activities, or finding some golden mean, some middle road between the two extremes that allow us to show our concern and our love for them and our willingness to go the extra mile in order to show our love for them. And to also pursue our own spiritual ideals and set a good example to them as we do so. So in our family, what we do is we divide the holidays into two separate sets of activities. We understand that as for my wife and I and our own children, we want to pursue a beautiful, faithful Christian holiday celebration. And we do that without putting any pressure or demanding it from our non-Christian or non-Catholic relatives. We don't ask them to provide us with a Catholic holiday celebration. That's our responsibility because we're the ones who are Catholics. And so we set aside certain events, certain dates and times, certain activities, and we really consecrate those activities as our Christian or Catholic holiday celebrations. And then we also set aside time to do other things. And I'll go into the details of these in our own family life. So for example, let's say Thanksgiving comes around. Well, Thanksgiving is not a church holiday. It's not a real Christian holiday. It's an American holiday. It has more to do with the time of year and the harvest season than it does with any real Catholic activity. It's not part of the liturgical calendar. It's an American holiday. In other countries, they don't even celebrate Thanksgiving. And so as far as Thanksgiving is concerned, we keep it simple. I don't try to make something big out of Thanksgiving. So on Thanksgiving, we'll happily go over to my parents' house and we'll just enjoy time together. And I'll lead the family in prayer and give thanks. And the family doesn't care. The family actually expects me to do that. And so I'll prepare a Thanksgiving Day prayer, give God thanks for our health, pray for everyone for the coming year. And it's an opportunity for me to bear witness of my own faith and gratitude to God, and also to pray with and for my relatives. And so I can't imagine a better opportunity to evangelize my family members than to pray with them and for them at the Thanksgiving meal. And so we get together at my parents' house, have a huge Thanksgiving dinner. We'll sit down and watch a football game or just hang out and relax and enjoy Thanksgiving Day, a natural American seasonal holiday celebration. And we'll seek to make it as evangelistic and as inspirational as we can, without trying to make more of it than we need to. And that's how we handle Thanksgiving, and that's what we'll be doing this week. As the Christmas season comes along, first of all, we give extra attention throughout the season of Advent to the recitation of the Liturgy of the Hours. We try to consecrate the entire Advent season with even more focused attention on daily prayer and daily Mass. And we celebrate the Advent season as a truly Catholic and religious holiday season, a very important part of the liturgical calendar, and we prepare for the celebration of the Nativity, or Christmas. And so the primary way that we celebrate or recognize the Advent season is not by introducing all kinds of goofy things of our own invention, but we simply focus on the liturgical calendar, the daily scripture readings, and the liturgy of the hours. We sing Advent hymns at family prayer, and so on. When the Christmas season comes, the primary way that we celebrate the holidays spiritually is not by trying to do crazy things at home, but by simply attending all of the masses, again, focusing on the liturgy of the hours, attending all the different masses or other activities that are going on in the parish. That's where we celebrate the holidays as Catholics. We celebrate them in the church with our parish community, with our spiritual family. We celebrate the spiritual holiday, the spiritual ceremonies, and so on. And so starting with Advent, we focus on the actual spiritual events being celebrated at this time of year, and we primarily do so through parish activities and with the liturgy of the hours. We'll continue to do this, and we'll choose either Christmas Eve or Christmas Day to attend Mass. Normally Christmas Day. And we'll basically take Christmas Eve and Christmas morning to give God the focus of our attention on Christmas. And then on Christmas Day afternoon, we'll go to my parents' house and have a Christmas dinner together. And it's more of a secular Christmas dinner. The kind of Christmas dinner that I grew up with. We'll have some good food, exchange gifts. Watch some football or basketball together, relax. Let my parents enjoy time with the kids. Let the kids have some fun on the holiday. And by early evening, we'll wrap up and head home. And we've checked the box for the secular Christmas celebration, made all the family members happy, and that's that. There's no need to choose either or, to start fights over things, or to pretend. And here's one thing I'd warn about. To pretend that one activity ruins our whole Christmas when we have, first of all, 12 days to celebrate Christmas. We had the entire Advent season. We had activities at the parish all throughout the Advent and Christmas season. We could have participated in all of them freely, and then we pretend like Christmas dinner ruined Christmas for us. And you see what can happen is, if you're lazy and selfish, you're going to pretend that there's only one possible activity that can be chosen, and you're going to pretend you have to choose one or the other and make everybody upset. I think that's just being a jerk, to be honest. I think it's causing unnecessary offense. And like I said, if you're willing to divide up the season a little more carefully, invest a little more thought, a little more planning, maybe more travel, maybe more expenses, maybe a little discomfort, for the sake of the golden rule, those problems can be avoided. But I think many times when Christians complain about these things, they're just being selfish. They're being lazy. They're using the holiday as an excuse to just stiff mom and dad and avoid participating in good family customs and activities. And I don't think that has anything to do with any demand from Christianity. I think it's just being used as an excuse to just do your own will and not compromise for the benefit of your family members. And then I know Christian parents will also complain and say, oh, well, relatives may have a bad influence on the kids, and the relatives may talk to the kids about things, or they may question our religion, or they may this, or they may introduce them to that. Listen, we have 365 days a year, 24 hours a day to train and teach our children. If our children's faith is really that fragile that a conversation with Uncle Joe at Christmas dinner can shipwreck the whole Christian life, then something else is wrong. We've got bigger problems than that 5-minute conversation with Uncle Joe. These little things are not the causes of problems. I think most of the time they simply reveal problems that we try to ignore or keep covered. You know, it's easy to pretend all of your kids are doing well spiritually when you lock them in the Christian house, throw away all the television sets, don't allow them to talk to any non-Christians, and so on. It's easy to pretend that everybody is devout and faithful and courageous. It's easy to talk about saints. It's easy to talk about what you would do or should do, and to sit there and criticize people for what they do wrong. But that's not the mission of the church. Jesus didn't say, when I ascended to heaven, I want you to lock the doors. Don't let anyone in. Don't talk to anyone. Don't make friends with any of the neighbors. I want you to hunker down, hide out, and be totally secluded so nobody corrupts you, so nobody causes you to lose faith. That's not the faith that Jesus taught. And if our religion, or the religion that we pretend to have, requires that we hide from the world, it's like a soldier claiming to have strength, claiming to have skill in martial arts, but needing to make sure that he hides from battle because all of his strength would be shown to be no strength at all if there was actually a fight. If we're strong, our strength is for the contest. If we're faithful, our faithfulness is for bearing witness, not in secret, but in public. And if these activities, when we interact with other people who are not Catholics or even Christians, and they expose weaknesses and bad habits in our children, we need to realize that those events are not the causes of those problems. They're simply the manifestations of them. And what are we going to do? Prefer to ignore them instead, or are we going to deal with them and try to strengthen our children in those areas and teach and emphasize them? But don't blame Uncle Joe, because it's very unlikely that Uncle Joe's doing anything bad at all. And besides, the mission, like I said, is to go into the world and make disciples. And if we see that our children don't have an influential character developing in them where they enter into a conversation not as the influencers, but as those influenced, well, then we need to deal with that the other 364 and a half days of the year and not pretend that suddenly our children are being made bad by a conversation. Rather, our children are being shown to be weak. Just like, as I said, if there was a soldier, or even better, let's say a wrestler, who we imagined to be strong, yet when we let him wrestle, just got thrown all over the place by the other competitors. You can keep telling yourself that he's strong. You can keep him locked up in the house and keep telling him and keep talking about how strong he is and how he would win and how the other people are so weak. But when you let him out of the house and he starts getting thrown around, you need to realize that your opinion of his strength is what's actually diluted here. And it's better for us to see those things, to know what our children's strengths and weaknesses are, so that we can then concentrate on them and try to help them build up those areas where they're weak. But don't make more out of these situations than they really are. And also don't interpret everything that other people do as intentionally evil. They may just be speaking what they see or what they experience. They may not be under the influence of grace that you are. They may not have eyes to see the things that you see, or ears to hear the things that you hear. They're not intentionally and willfully denying them. They simply don't know they exist. Why would they confess something to be true that they don't have the faith to believe? The faith in you, after all, is a gift. It's not something that you cause to exist in yourself. So don't put a negative spin on everything that everyone does. Give people the benefit of the doubt. Be patient. Where there's a necessity, you can step in and call a kid away or give a kid something else to do. If you leave all the kids idle while you sit at the table gabbing, don't blame the kids. Don't blame other people for being themselves. If you're a parent with high standards, then you have to be vigilant and be responsible. Keep the kids busy. Give them good things to do. Keep an eye on what's going on. Don't let them get out of control. Don't put them in situations where the normal behavior in that situation is going to make you angry. Be reasonable. This is why I said again, it may take some extra planning. It may take some extra expense. And so on. Be willing to do that extra work to avoid or prevent those situations from developing, rather than fussing about them after you've allowed them to develop. So like I said, these family troubles during the holidays, for many of us, they can be a real cause of vexation. But I would argue that that vexation is unreasonable. Usually what you're doing, and I've done this myself, which is why I can speak about it so confidently, what you're really doing is simply blaming little things that happen for problems that have deeper roots. You're being frustrated, for example, that the kid After all of your fuss about religion and fuss about homeschooling and fuss about behavior, you watch as your kid acts just like the other kids, or worse. You're embarrassed, you're frustrated, and you want to blow up on everybody as if it's their fault. I know what that feels like. I've been in that situation before. But everyone around you isn't wrong. And it's one of the things where maybe you boast about your Christian life and your homeschooling and your kids and your standards a little more than you should. Maybe you assume worse things about other people and their kids than you should. And maybe these holiday gatherings make you upset because they show you that things aren't going as well as you pretend they are, that you're not as different or special as you imagine you are, and you just don't like that. So it's a time for real self-examination. Like I said, I've dealt with all these things growing up as a Christian adult and as a parent through the years. And I've learned that even though my parents are not Christians, even though my siblings are not Christians, through the years, they've proven to be some of the best people in my life, and I've had Catholic people in my life turn out to be real, I don't know what to say without being too crude, real scoundrels. And as a 46-year-old, I think very differently about my parents and my siblings than I did when I was 25 or 30, because I've gotten the opportunity to experience just how evil the Catholic people can be. And if I had to choose who I'd rather spend time with at this point in my life, I know that the more trustworthy people, despite all their faults, are my relatives. We disagree on things, we live differently, we pursue different things, we argue at times, but when all is said and done, we love each other, and we'd fight for each other, because we're family. In those natural family relationships, we have to be careful not to take for granted, not to ruin them, not to throw them away, but to continue to cultivate them, to continue to protect and cherish them, because even those natural relationships are a gift, especially for those of us with good relations with our family members. It's a gift that not many people have. And we have to be careful that we don't take them for granted and despise them, or we may lose them. And that would be a real tragedy. Besides, if we lose those relationships, if we break those relationships, how does that help us in the work of evangelization? How does that help us to lead our family members to Christ? After all, the goal of this life for Christians is not to simply depart from everyone or separate from everyone, but it's to go and make disciples. How is breaking those relationships? How is no longer spending time with our relatives because they're not Christians going to help them become Christians? That doesn't make any sense. And I'd argue it's just a cop-out, because the challenge of actually going into those relationships, going into those activities, and actually bearing witness to the grace of God is difficult. It's difficult. Especially when we're converts and they know the old version of ourselves and like the old version, and we're still trying to put on the new person. We're still trying to establish new habits. We're still trying to establish a new character in Christ. And when we go back into those old places, old relationships, old environments, that old person in us seems to be easily revived, and it frustrates us. But we have the opportunity to give our testimony, to be honest, to talk about what's going on in our lives, to talk about what we think, what we've learned, what we've experienced, and be patient that through the years, one conversation, one Thanksgiving may lead to another at Christmas, which may lead to another at Easter. And then all of a sudden we may have a family member facing death or disease or some difficulty. And those conversations may give us the opportunity to connect with that person and have sober conversations when the real issues in life have to be faced. And we have to commit to the evangelization of all of our family members, our relatives, neighbors, and so on. So realize how many of these issues that frustrate us or displease us in these situations may actually be challenges that we have to accept, signs of weaknesses that we have to overcome, opportunities to evangelize that we don't want to face. And so rather than complaining about them and blaming them and talking about all of their faults, maybe we need to spend more time seeing the weaknesses that these events expose in ourselves, and make it our goal this year to overcome them, to go into the world and make disciples. There's one story in the life of Christ where there's a man who's demon-possessed, and Christ frees him from those spirits, and the formerly demon-possessed man asks Christ if he can come with him. And Christ says to that man, he says, no. He tells him, no, you may not come with me, but rather go back to your people and tell them of the good things that God has done for you. That's that man's mission. That's that man's mission field, his own family, his own relatives. Christ doesn't allow him to come away from them. Christ doesn't will that he separate himself from them, but rather that he go back and bear witness to the power of the gospel in their presence, so they can see the change that's taken place in him, and he can bear witness to the source of that change. That's a challenge that's difficult to undertake, and I think that that is one of the reasons why Christians often get frustrated at holiday time, because they know that they're going to have to face that pressure. I could tell you a funny story. One Thanksgiving, my son Jonathan, my oldest, he was probably 5 years old. And we sat down all together at the dining room table with my family members, my siblings, my parents. Everyone's sitting there around a big dining room table full of food. And my son looks across the table at my father and says, "Hey, Pop, are you going to hell?" And you can imagine the awkwardness of that situation. And I'm sure that many of you have experienced things like that. But as I sat there, I thought to myself, well, that's how the discussion gets started. It is what it is. We might as well deal with it. So I just sat back in my seat and waited to hear the response. And we had a good conversation. And I thank that little 5-year-old for getting it started. But if you're honest, if you're not hypocritical, if you're not fake, your parents know who you are, your siblings know who you are, they know all your faults, they know all the sins of your youth. Don't be a hypocrite. Be sincere, be humble. If you are different, it's only by the grace of God, not because of anything that you have done. You haven't picked yourselves up by the bootstraps. It's not the strength of your hands that have made you different. It's the grace of God. And in many ways, you're still not different. You can talk about concupiscence. You can talk about how sin always remains in you. You can talk about how the sacrament of confession helps you. You can talk about the sacraments and how salvation is not a matter of being perfectly holy, but of living in the grace of God, confessing your faults, striving to amend your life, striving to grow day by day, and that God is patient. Jesus Christ came into the world to save sinners. That all of this is normal. Because after all, what your relatives need is not to become perfect so that they might become acceptable, but they need to become disciples of Christ. And the first step of that is to hear the gospel preached to them. And that needs to be the purpose of these holiday celebrations, not to execute the most perfectly planned, beautiful, Instagram-worthy celebration, not to create the most stunning photo opportunities or win the neighborhood decorating contest. But if we make the simple goal of these holiday celebrations to preach the gospel to ourselves, to our children, to our relatives, to our neighbors, to our friends, we'll find that these activities provide us with innumerable opportunities to do so. So rather than looking at all the negatives and pretending irrationally like unbelievers should be celebrating Christian holidays in a Christian way, which makes no sense, rather, see the fact that people in the world are gathering together around the birth of Christ or on a day to give thanks. See these as opportunities to preach the gospel. The good news, that is. Take the opportunity, find a way to preach the good news. And the good news is that even though we be sinful, downright evil, selfish, lazy, gluttonous, on and on, Even though we fail in so many ways, God is merciful. And God has provided so that imperfect, fallen, weak, ignorant, sinful people can yet be saved. The good news is that Jesus Christ came into the world to save sinners. Sinners like Mary Magdalene. Sinners like Saul, the Jew who was persecuting and killing Christians before being transformed into St. Paul. Sinners like Peter, who denied Christ 3 times on the night of his betrayal. Sinners like St. Augustine, who were sexually immoral, had children outside of marriage, and became one of the doctors of the church. Jesus Christ came into the world to save sinners. And the whole point of the gospel can be summed up with one thing that Jesus said, and it's very easy to communicate this with others. When Jesus was approached by the rich young ruler said, "Good teacher, what must I do to inherit eternal life?" And Jesus' response was, "Why do you call me good? There is only one who is good, and that's God." That's not a hard message to share on any of the holidays. God alone is good. That's the gospel. God is good. We have infinite faults. We've done innumerable evils. We all fall in many different ways. But our eternal happiness is dependent on the reality that God is good. And I think that you can share that with your relatives this holiday season. God bless.